Happy Tuesday. Today is Tuesday, July the 6th, 2021. Today's daily Bible readings come to us from Psalm 21, 2 Samuel 5, 11 through 16, James 5, 7 through 12, or you could have read Psalm 119, 81 through 88, Jeremiah 16, 1 through 13, and then James 5, 7 through 12. I'm going to take a look at 2 Samuel 5, 11 through 16 today. And I'm going to start off because I've got this great quote for you, and it comes from a guy named St. John Cassian, and probably somebody you're not very familiar with. If you're not, that's okay. I wasn't either. I just kind of lucked upon it because I found it in this book called The Philokalia. And no, I don't just go out looking for books like this to read. They kind of find their way to me. I sort of inherited this one. But it's great because it's all these like people who did church before we ever did and kind of experienced in different ways all the problems that we and they wrote stuff down, about like, oh, here's this problem and this how you deal with it. Oh, you're going to face this and this is how you deal with it. It's incredible. I know, right? It's like, a big help. But anyway, this quote I found, the guy he's talking about perception and discrimination. All right, so don't make a judgment yet. Let me read you the quote. He says, "Wisdom, intellection, and perceptiveness are united in discrimination. And without these, our inner house cannot be built, nor can we gather spiritual wealth. For it is written, through wisdom, a house is built, through understanding, it is established, and through good judgment, its storehouses will be filled with wealth." And that's him quoting Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4. So that's a lot to unpack. But first of all, he isn't talking about discrimination the way we commonly talk about it today. In our world, in our culture, when we use the word discrimination, we're usually also linking it to the idea of racism, right? Discriminating against people for no other cause than the color of their skin or their ancestry or things like that. That's not how he's using discrimination. That word, he uses it to talk about how we decide what has worth, right? And what doesn't have worth, what is a value and what isn't a value, what is a good action and what is a bad action. What are things that we should do, we should pursue, and what are things that we shouldn't. And so all of it in a Christian perspective is understood in light of God's presence and God's will. And that's how Christians discriminate between what is truly good and what is not even just bad, because that's the problem. If it would be really easy if everything were just like blatantly bad, right? We could discriminate really easily. Anybody can discriminate between bad and good. But the problem is sometimes things aren't just all bad. Sometimes things are only, there's a lot, there might be some good in it, but overall it kind of leads you away from the direction God would have you to go. And if you aren't able to discriminate between what is overall really good and what is maybe kind of good, but in the long run not so good, that can cause you real problems. And so all of that in this Christian perspective is understood in light of God's presence and God's will. How is God present in this? How is God's will for you and his overall will fulfilled in you choosing this? And so, as St. John is saying here, our wisdom, our intellect, right, our ability to think and understand, our perceptions are united together to what is actually best, right, in the light of what God has done and is doing for us to build that spiritual house in our lives, that spiritual house in which he'll dwell. And hence the quote from Proverbs 24. That brings me to this text from 2 Samuel, because David perceives. We're told that David perceived. Well, what is it that he perceives? Well, he's watching his literal house grow from the ground up, and he's watching the rooms fill with children, right? So he's become king. He's kind of the fight is really pretty much over, and everybody else has acknowledged him, and now they're sending him gifts, and they're sending, which in today's world be awesome if somebody sent carpenters to your house and a load of lumber, because man, that stuff's expensive, believe you me, right now. But so they sent all these gifts. They sent cedar and carpenters to build him a house, and so he's standing there watching all this stuff get dropped off. The truck from Lowe's or Home Depot comes in, slides it all off on the ground. Guys show up, get out of their work trucks with their coffee, start building his house. He starts having kids, and he's doing really well. And it says that David then perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people. So David's watching this all happen. And David is clear enough to perceive who is really doing this work and why they're doing it. It's not just, he's realized that this is all God's doing, and God is doing good to him, but not just for the sake of doing good to David, but so that good might be done for the people of his nation, the people Israel. That's a far cry from Saul. Saul didn't ever seem to really get that. So David is very different in his perceptions that way, in his ability to discriminate about what's really going on and what's good. Now, that isn't to say that David was great at this all the time. We go on, and you see through the rest of the story that David screws up. David loses sight. Sometimes his perception is foggy, and he loses sight of this fact. And his ability to discriminate between what's good and what's not so good kind of lags, let's just put it that way. But in general, he's on the right track. So, the question is, what do you perceive? Are you able to perceive what it is that God is doing and is doing for you, and why he is even doing that? And consequently, can you discriminate between what is really good in God's sense and what is maybe not so good in the long term as far as God is concerned? So anyway, that's the DBR for today. Get out. Have a good day. We'll be back with another DBR tomorrow. See you later. Boop.